Channel Africa on DSTV Audio Bouquet. Channel 802.
It is 20 after 12 Central African time, and we're coming to you live from Johannesburg in South Africa. The African Perspectives on Cybersecurity Report 2025 has revealed a sharp rise in cyber attacks across Africa and a shift in tactics driven by artificial intelligence. The report by Checkpoint Software Technologies shows that African organizations now face an average of over 3,000 attacks per week. Among the countries analysed in Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya and Morocco. To tell us more, we are joined on the line by Hendrik De Bruin, head of SADC Security Consulting at Checkpoint Software Technologies. Hendrik, good afternoon and thank you for joining us on Africa Update.
Good afternoon, Lulu, and thank you for having me.
Now, this report reveals that Nigeria has recorded the highest number of weekly attacks, and Ethiopia ranked the most attacked nation. Unpack this for us.
Thank you very much, Lulu. So yes, our report focuses on the key countries that you mentioned, SADC, including South Africa, Kenya, Morocco, and Nigeria. And we found that between those four countries, Nigeria is being attacked on average by about, as you mentioned, over 4,200 attacks per week per organization. And when we look at South Africa, we actually rank a little bit lower, about 2,200 attacks per week per organization. But when we look at Ethiopia, we see that they actually have more than 11,000 attacks per organization per week. So they are, in fact, the highest attacked country on the continent. However, our report specifically focused on Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, and Morocco.
Just for interest's sake, Hendrik, why is Ethiopia experiencing such high attacks?
So most of this really relates to the fact that we've seen across the continent, large digitalization and the adoption of a digital technology such as cloud services, etc. So when organizations are moving over from paper-based processes to digital systems and they adopt additional services such as cloud services, software as a service, etc., we also find that in parallel they are in fact increasing their digital attack surface, increasingly allowing attackers a larger area to really play with in terms of exploitation of vulnerabilities, etc. So part of this whole digital adoption also expands that attack surface that attackers are really leveraging. And, the key message here is that when we adopt digital systems, we need to ensure that we adopt them securely and that security is essentially built in to the solutions and the digitization process itself.
Now, South Africa has seen a sharp rise in ransomware, while Kenya has been impacted by critical infrastructure attacks. It seems that countries across the continent are attacked in many different ways.
Correct, yes. So there's multiple factors that really play a role here. When we look at these attacks, it's often guided by the end goal. When we look at ransomware as an example, the end goal behind these attacks are really financially motivated. Most often, the attackers are after the data so they can use it as a ransom, to hold the organization self-ransom. When we look at attacks related to critical infrastructure, oftentimes we need to dig a little bit deeper because there might not be a financial incentive behind it. It might be something like a nation-state actor that really is looking at, causing real harm to the country itself. Because what we look at when we look at, the attacks on critical infrastructure, it may have a real physical world impact where, electricity grids could potentially be shut down or water supply, etc. So it's difficult to always understand why a specific country is attacked more within a specific sector than another, because we need to dig into those specific factors to better understand the motivation behind those attacks.
And what are some of the threats that the report highlighted for the rest of the year?
So, we continue to see an increase in ransomware attacks where, they don't only focus on the encryption of data, they start to focus more on the exfiltration of data and extorting the organization in that manner. And then also we see, as you also mentioned, we see an increase in velocity related to attacks primarily driven by AI, right? Because AI has significantly increased it's essentially a force multiplier that attackers can leverage, and they can now automate the process of creating sophisticated phishing campaigns, on-demand videos that they can use as lures, etc. And then also for the consumers, we're going into Black Friday now, we're going into the festive period, so they also need to be on the lookout for increased attacks related to phishing, smishing, etc. So the consumers, the audience also needs to be more vigilant. And also when we look at sporting events, we have the African Cup of Nations coming up as well as the World Cup next year. And in terms of those sporting events, we've also found that there's currently infrastructure being set up by cyber criminals to leverage on those events also. So just increased vigilance from the consumers, understand that we are heading into that festive period and we typically see an increase in attacks. So people need to be more vigilant when operating in the digital world.
And just in wrapping up, how can Africa prevent these threats? What does the continent need to do, and just the countries individually and collectively?
Yes. So from the consumers, as I mentioned, increase the awareness, understanding that the digital world is under threat, and attackers will leverage what they can. So need to be more, carry that awareness, have the vigilance. Don't click on suspicious links when you get that phone call, from somebody that you don't necessarily know. Make sure to also verify the caller. I always say, the banks do a great job when they phone you to validate, that they are speaking to the correct person. But do you do the same to your bank? Do you verify that caller on the other end before you start talking about your bank account numbers to make sure that you are speaking to a representative of the bank? And then we look at organizations. They need to look at adopting a more holistic approach to cybersecurity that takes into consideration not only the runtime environments, but also the build and the pipeline itself.
Well, Hendrik, always a pleasure chatting to you. Thank you for joining us on Africa Update. That's Hendrik De Bruin, head of SADC Security Consulting at Checkpoint Software Technologies, joining us on the line.
Celebrate life every day. Tune in to Channel Africa. Stay connected through a new website and free mobile app. Gender